We're on Spotify, by the way.
Really?
Spotify.
Go check out the Spotify. Back in the Gap on Spotify.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Back in the Gap.
Me and some of the boys were playing poker after church last night. We were throwing some cardboard.
As you do.
And I had to
Slinging
run
some
real
chips.
quick to go upload a thing, but I was going to be right back. And as I'm getting ready to leave, Travis here texts me, hey, we're done. Everybody's leaving. And I was like, no, I missed it.
It's disappointing.
And Travis comes over and he's like, hey, you still down to get some donuts?
Mm-hmm.
Because throughout the night, we had discussed the potential of getting donuts. And me and Travis went and got some. We texted Luke, and he was like, dog, I want some donuts. So we drop off some donuts for Luke, and then we take a selfie with the box of donuts. And I text them, good things come to those who wait. Lamentations 3:25, which is somewhat severely taking that verse out of context.
Somewhat severely.
Somewhat. But, you know.
Somewhat.
Those are two words that don't go together.
Only
It's
somewhat,
funny.
though.
And our friend Jonathan texts back, dang, buddy, I am genuinely jealous. I ate bread and ketchup for dinner, struggle meal.
What?
Then Luke texts back,
Ketchup
busting it down
sandwich.
poverty style. And then Luke says, the donuts I had are hitting me. And then Jonathan's like, bro, you had donuts? And then I was like, dog, you already ate all 4? 'Cause it's only been like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And we gave Luke 4 donuts. And he's like, 2 were gone before I made it in the house.
I mean,
Which is
four
crazy.
donuts in 10 minutes isn't that wild to me, I don't think.
Not really.
Maybe not, but I was like, he said he ate 2 of the donuts before he got inside.
That's like,
Yeah.
what, 2 minutes, 25 seconds for a donut? Something like that?
2:30,
Oh,
60 seconds in a minute.
that's you're
Well,
right.
see, I remember growing up, Joey, like them having discussions about enjoying their desserts and like eating
Yeah.
it slowly. The Luke and his siblings.
You know, I also think about that Duck Dynasty episode where they're eating donuts, and I think it was Cy who's like, man, slow and steady wins the race.
Mhm.
And all the other guys pound some donuts in like a couple minutes, but then Cy just doesn't stop. And then he laps them, and then he keeps going. And that's kind of how I feel about donuts, especially when they're warm like that.
I'm not going to lie, I only watched like 1 season of Duck Dynasty.
Anyways, welcome back to the Back in the Gap podcast, episode 2. We've actually made it 2 episodes in a very, very good time slot.
Yeah.
This many.
We did 2 episodes,
Well, actually, this many.
like, actually on schedule.
Yeah.
It's only taken us 2 years to come up with the schedule.
And just different people.
Luke and Ware couldn't make it for this episode. They got caught. The bridge was up. Somebody was going under. So instead, we got Travis and Josh here. And today, we're going to talk about life transitions.
Make me feel so special.
You know, last week we talked about kind of the busyness of life and how to adapt to different schedules. But for these 2 guys, they're both a year out of high school, just finished their first year of college. For myself, I'm only 2 years separated from high school. And so in that time, all 3 of us have gone from being a student in student ministry and in school to then being in a leadership role. We just got back recently from a camp that we went with our student ministry, where now we're leaders and not students. So yeah, I just want to talk about the transitions of life, the transitions that we're gonna have to, you know, go through within the next couple of years, and just how to handle that. So one of the main reasons that we want to talk about these life transitions is because, you know, we grew up in student ministry. And now, thankfully, have a young adult ministry at our church that is healthy, that is thriving, that we've been able to move up into. But for many of the people we grew up with, they have not followed with us and come to young adult ministry. A study done by Lifeway Research in 2019 found that about 2/3 of those who regularly attended church during their teenage years leave when they become an adult. And that's a very scary statistic. It's a very true statistic that, you know, even we would hear while we were in high school, well, that's not us. And and it's definitely not as bad. But we have a lot of people that we grew up with that we see have left the church, and so I think that reflecting on our experience, going from student ministry to young adult ministry, can be beneficial to understanding, how do we break this statistic, right? How do we, through student ministry, build up solid believers who are going to make that decision for themselves to continue to attend church?
Mm-hmm.
Because, we're adults. No one's forcing us to anymore, right?
Yeah.
And no one should have to force you to go to church, right? Even as a student, if a student is being forced to go to church every Sunday and has no desire on their own to be there, they're not going to show up when they turn 18.
Yeah.
Yeah. Based off of that research, I can clearly say that we from a younger age were kind of mentored to have a more personal connection with the groups that we were involved with, and also just be more invested. I know growing up, like, the reason it's so easy for me to just naturally come every time I have the chance is because, of the relationships that we have with each other, and also just the fact that, like, it's because I wanted to go up there. I had reason, things to go and experience. It's easy for people to just say, oh, you should just want to be involved. You should just love God enough just to show up, no matter how boring it might be. But I mean, it's really beyond that. I mean, yes, that may be the case, but that's just not how it is. Ultimately, we need these relationships and these connections to really, feel involved in the first place for us to even want to continue to be involved.
Yep.
And so I can easily say that the reason it became so easy to just stick it out after we got out of high school is because of, like, our being molded from the point of high school just into being a leader from the get-go, not until the leadership showed up.
And even before then too, like even during like middle school times,
Mm-hmm.
it was very heavily emphasized that you're always a leader no matter what age you are. People are watching you.
Yeah.
People are going to see what you're going to do and how well you're going to emphasize Christ in whatever it is that you do, whether you're in school, whether you're in band or whatever it is you're going to do. People are going to watch you. And that sort of mindset from that young of an age of you're a leader whether you think you are or not, it kind of sets that in stone from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think it was also important for us to understand that, who were we looking up to when we were in those younger years, and when we could see that some of the people we were looking to were really not that far separated from us, right? Maybe older than us by a handful of years. Well, then that makes it so much more real to look at the kids who are coming up after us and being like, well, they're looking to us, and that's a very scary thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a
very
it's a
surreal
big
thing.
responsibility that we did not ask for, but we already have it. And so then stepping from there and then being a leader in a more official capacity was a lot easier because it wasn't such a
It wasn't like thrust upon
immediate
us.
it wasn't an immediate change we were thrust upon. It was a more gradual thing where it didn't even feel like a change. It just kind of felt like a natural evolution.
It felt like the natural progression of things. And I think leading up to that, we kind of expected it. Like for us being in high school, we kind of prepared ourselves for it. Because I remember us three specifically having a talk of like, we want to set a good example for the ones that are younger than us. So I think for the most part, we pretty much planned on like being leaders, coming back to the youth whenever we could, and helping out in whatever capacity we could. And there were others that planned on doing that too that haven't shown up as much. But I think that was kind of always in the plan for us for the most part. At least I think it was for us three.
Yeah. And I also think something that was incredibly important was a very staggered set of changes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is at our church, halfway through my senior year, I was invited to go to young adult ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was still fully involved in student ministry. I was still fully a student, and that came first. But from that point on, I was also a young adult and was able to participate in these events. So it wasn't such a sudden shift, because you're already going through so many changes just in your normal life.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as May hits, you're graduated and you're no longer in high school, and
Gotta get ready
you
for
already have
college.
your college set up. You have to go to orientation, and it's just a lot all at once.
Yeah.
And so having that little change before of, hey, well, you're going to be a young adult a little early, get you acclimated, so you're not lost in the change of everything. Because it really is overwhelming to go through all of these changes all at once. And I think that that's a big problem for a lot of people our age who they're still trying to, you know, and I'm not saying that I'm not either, but they're still trying to figure out, well, what am I doing in my life now? Everything's been kind of set, like, do this, do this, do this.
Yeah.
And now I have control that is very scary to have, because I've definitely felt that way. And so, you know, having those little staggered, well, I can handle this small amount of change here, and then this small amount of change here, and then this small amount of change makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah, I was going to say, as you were talking about gradual changes, that having us go in, like, what was it, January or February, depended.
I think it was
whatever.
January, like mid-January.
Yeah, just having us go early. And for us, some of us, we already had those connections with some of the older guys, like Luke and Ware. But, I mean, say take someone who would show up maybe later, get involved in the youth later, who didn't get a chance to get to know some older people, and then having to go to young adult, that would be a very stark and intimidating transition.
Yeah.
It's just have no connections beforehand and just get thrown into it like you're just, well, that sounds ruder, but then it normally works out. But just getting out of the youth, not being able to go back, and just having to go into a brand new group with no connections would be very intimidating.
Yep.
So for us, I mean, it was even still helpful regardless of our connections. But I can imagine for someone without those connections, it would be an even more intimidating transition.
Yeah. Another really important thing that I found, and I was really distraught by this at first, our student minister basically sat down with me. We grabbed some lunch at one point in my senior year, and he said, hey, man, would you like to, you know, help with student ministry, you know, once you're graduate? I was like, absolutely, of course. I love student ministry. I mean, how could I not come back and help? And he was like, that's awesome. For a year, you're not allowed to.
Yep.
And I was like, what? And basically, you know, he sat down and talked to me. I was like, I want to make it very clear that you're not a student to the other students. You know, at the time, if I would have come back immediately as a leader and had you two as students and me be a leader, that would not have...
It would have been a weird mesh of things, because that line between student and leader is still blurred, and you
It'd
like
be
hang
blurred,
out with friends and get into cliques, and
it'd just be a situation where really I would have been just continuing to go to student ministry.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have sat down and asked a question or two in the small group, but it would not have been a real transition from student to leader.
Yeah.
And so I'm so thankful that our student minister has this rule in place, because when I finally did get to go back to camp a year later, it really did feel like I was a leader. It was such a great experience to, you know, going back and being able to fill that, you know, leadership role. But I then had a different relationship with our students in the student ministry.
Yeah.
And it was another thing that was a staggered change, where it wasn't thrust upon me immediately. It felt, you know, it felt like, well, you don't trust me to be a leader yet? Like, what's going on? But in reality, what it was is another change that was going to happen, but it was just separated slightly, and it made it a lot more easy to manage.
Yeah.
And it also allowed me to have some time to involve myself in other ministries that I wouldn't have otherwise, right? when you're in student ministry, your Wednesday night and your Sunday night is locked up. And now I'm able to participate in the AV team, and I've been able to participate in the men's ministry, and just gone to a regular adult class on a Sunday night, which are things I wouldn't have done if I was allowed to just go to student ministry the entire time.
Yeah, for sure. Having that 1 year gap gives you like a different perspective on the students as well. I don't know if y'all have felt this or not, but like the way that you see the students that you're that 1 year removed from, it's different from the way that you see the students that you are in there with, because like whenever like this past week of camp that we went to, a lot of times when I look at the students, I like to try and envision who they will be in the future, and what kind of effect I can have on that now, and what kind of an impact I can have on that now. And I don't know, I don't think you really get that sort of perspective whenever you're in there with the students that you were once students along with, right?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
It's a different kind of a love that you have for them, right? Because it's more of a love of like a leader to a student, of like, I want to make sure that you're getting invested in the way that you need to be, not like the kind that is between friends like us of the same age, because you're able to spot out what they need whenever you're that far removed, right? You're able to see the things in their life that they're struggling with, the things that they may need to get out of this, the things that they need to get out of the week of camp, and you're able to implement those because you have that different kind of perspective. You're able to see where they're at in their relationship with Christ. You're able to help them along with that. But also their perspective of you changes. They're more apt to respect you as a leader, respect you as someone who is able to teach them this, someone who is able to pray for them and give them good advice, because you have that good advice, because you're further along in life than they are.
Yeah, I will agree, because it's like whenever you're in day-to-day with somebody, like I am with y'all, it's easy for me to just see you how I normally do and only see you that way.
Yeah.
And like however, when we're separated from these students, like whenever they do have that moment of vulnerability, it's so much easier to address the need right there.
Yeah.
And see the need and take it for what it is, rather than just like, oh, they're just struggling with that right now.
Yeah.
Whereas like as a leader, you address the need as like, they're probably struggling with this all the time. But it's like whenever you're with somebody all the time, they put up that mask of like, oh, I'm okay, I'm doing fine, I'm not struggling with this.
Yeah.
And so like you take it as, oh, this is recent. Whereas like whenever you're as a leader, seeing it from a more removed perspective, I would agree, like you're much able to address the need right there.
Yeah. Yeah, so my experience of the 1 year gap was a bit different than y'all's, because I've been leading Connect groups for a while now. I got lunch with our student minister today. We were trying to figure out when it was that I actually started, but I'm pretty sure it's been over a year now since I started, because it was I think it was my senior year of high school that I started leading Connect groups for the middle schoolers. So even though I wasn't able to get involved in like Wednesday nights, Sunday nights, or any of the other things that they were doing, I was able to be there with them on Sunday mornings, or every other Sunday morning. So for a lot of the middle schoolers, I already had that connection built up, which was really nice. And then they know me a little bit, but it was just different. And now that 1 year gap is up, I'm a lot more excited to be in there with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I feel like it makes a difference. Like if you would have gone, like you having middle school made a much bigger difference. Because like if it would have been, like it definitely wouldn't have been. You wouldn't have just started teaching your fellow students who you were the same age as. But if it would have been an older group, like these middle schoolers already saw you as a leader. Yeah. And some of them, like, this is their first time ever seeing you, was because they're just brand new to the youth and you just left. But, having that middle school group really allows for more of like it makes it more natural than it wouldn't have been if it would have been a high school group, because then the high schoolers probably would have saw you as a fellow student still in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you're able to have that, separation, even within student ministry. But I think taking a step back, we've also had, a very quick shift in terms of respect between adults. And, as a student, I remember there were, some of our friends' dads who were like, well, that's such and such's dad.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, I just call this dude by his first name.
Yeah, I know
Because
exactly who you're talking about.
yeah,
Like his students are in the student ministry, and we started hanging out with them like before we even met him. But then he came to one of our men's retreats. We got to know him a little bit, and then we just all of a sudden we're at the camp playing poker with him, and it was awesome.
Like you talk about on last week's episode, myself, Luke, and Ware talked a good bit about these men's retreats, and that's something where as soon as you're out of high school, they're like, all right, you're good to go. You're a man.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you go to one men's retreat, and then the next one, they're like, hey, you want to help out with this one and be on the lead team? And you're like,
Whoa.
Maybe.
Yeah. Whoa.
I mean, that's a pretty crazy transition where there's all of these guys that, like, I've known for, seemingly ever as an adult. That's Mr. Such and Such. I had this experience that was
almost out of body.
No, the experience was not out of body. I've been to one men's retreat as a retreatant, and then I've teamed two. And before I went on my first retreat, I had my first semester of college. I walk into this biology class, and the professor is like, hey, I think I've seen you before. We go to the same church. I was like, that's a cool connection. I didn't really know this guy. I see him at the retreat. I see him at the next retreat. I see him at the third retreat that I'm at, and I keep calling him Dr. Such and Such. He's a professor. I want to be respectful. And he just stops me. He's like, dog, you got to stop calling me that. We're the same. Call me by my first name. And I was like, wow, that
doesn't work.
That is impactful to me, because this is a guy that, like, maybe it's different, for some of these guys I've known my entire life.
Yeah.
I've only known this guy about a year.
Yeah.
And in the classroom, he made it very clear, like, I'm doctor, this, but, because of the opportunities that God has given us to serve in these different areas, I'm now able to call so many more people my friend instead of, oh yeah, I know him. I'm like, no, we're friends. Even though a couple of years ago, that would not be the term I would use, right? So yeah.
Yeah, for me, the men's retreats are a little bit different because, like, I haven't been going here as long as y'all have, so I knew none of these people. Like, the first place that I got acclimated into whenever I started coming here was the student ministry, and I didn't really leave that very much because my parents go to a different church. But I didn't know anybody in the men's ministry, so that was kind of just a diving in head first. It was just crazy to me how strong of a community they had, because, like, growing up, I've never witnessed, like, grown men saying that they love each other, hugging each other, just being there and crying over each other. I'd never seen that before. That was foreign to me. It was a very impactful thing, and it changed my perspective on what a man is supposed to be, I guess.
I would have to agree. I mean, it is very foreign to see a bunch of dudes being vulnerable with one another in our modern day society, and it is absolutely needed.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I know for myself, it was just like having that constant encouragement, especially for me. Teaming my first time was a much bigger difference. Like, I imagine that it was a bigger difference for Josh, his first one, because, it was so foreign to him. Yeah. But for me, it was like a little foreign, but not like, it wasn't out of my scope of like, oh, I can see that happening. Like, sure. It wasn't so foreign to me. But for me, teaming was what made such a big difference.
Yeah.
It's just like having a leadership role whenever I was 19 over
other dudes,
over men who were like in their 40s, 50s, some of them 60s, was just
Got
just
those
really
CPAPs on lock.
Yeah, sure did.
me and Josh got away from that room.
Yeah, we did. We wouldn't slept in the chapel.
Yeah, but just like having that experience, and then just being encouraged, and like for just being there, and for I mean, I don't mean to sound prideful, but just like getting that encouragement and praise for just being there and for accomplishing the tasks that were set before us, and just having a lot of encouragement just based off of like our character and stuff like that. Just like because it's easy to just forget how important these things are. And so just like having grown men who I've just seen as far removed from me for most of my life come up to me and tell me, that they're proud of me and everything.
Yeah.
Was just like completely out of experience.
That's something that we heard a lot was just like them telling us how happy they were and how glad they were and excited they were that young men were getting involved in the men's ministry.
Yeah.
And were able to be there. So that was super encouraging.
I'm trying to find this verse. Okay, here it is.
Is it the same verse that I might have pulled up?
Are you in 1 Timothy?
Yeah. Is it 1 Timothy 4, starting in verse 11? Command to teach these things, let no one despise you for your
Yes,
youth, but set the believers an example in speech and conduct and love and faith and purity. Until I come, devote yourself to exhortation, to teaching. Do not neglect the gift that you have, which is given to you by prophecy when the council of elders laid their hands on you. Practice these things, immerse yourself in them, so that all may see your progress. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so, you will save both yourself and your hearers.
That is the passage that I was looking for. And with these retreats, I mean, they just exemplify that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, even amongst, other Christians, sometimes I felt growing up like, well, it's not my place to speak here.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was not my place to speak, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to let the adults in the room talk. But I was so thankful that these other Christian men were willing to have the respect to listen to me and to let me take some form of leadership and allow me to grow in that. And I mean, that has especially helped, our transition going from, student to leader.
Yeah.
And that's really what this boils down to, is, we have to allow people to take these small steps to work in to where they need to be.
For reference, that passage was 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. So if you're a younger person in whatever ministry you're in, get to know your leaders personally. Get to know them not just as somebody that is your teacher, not somebody who just gives you information on a Sunday morning or on a Wednesday night or something like that. Get to know them as a friend. Get to know them that you seek advice from. Have lunch with them. They're more than just somebody that is at the church that you go to. And that's going to be what sets a solid foundation for coming back, for getting invested, because these people, if you set them up as the ones that you look up to, if they're the ones that you set up as the ones you mold your life after, then that's what you're going to become. You're going to become the ones that are actively giving of themselves, that are actively giving up their time, actively giving up their effort to give back to the church, to be able to do the will of God and whatever He has for you, because that's what they pursue. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to pursue ministry. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to pursue teaching. It means that you're going to copy their energy to pursue the will of God, to pursue the scriptures, to pursue a consistent, constant prayer life, and be able to see God's will in that, and be able to have that strong connection with the church. Because, like for us, our student pastors in the past, both of them, we knew them personally. They weren't just somebody that we listened to on a Wednesday night. They weren't somebody that just like gave us like Sunday school teachers or whatever. It was our friends, essentially. Yeah. And especially after coming out of that like student position and getting into this leader position, going to camp, helping out in whatever student ministries we can, that's grown to an even greater extent now because we're working alongside them instead of just getting advice from them.
Yep.
So I'd say definitely get to know your leaders as much as you can, because I promise you, if you have good leaders, they want to get to know you too.
Yeah. And I think that, getting to know your leaders, everything you said is extremely important.
Oh yeah.
But also find those people who are just a couple years separated from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it can be intimidating to look at, this, say, 30-something-year-old person, and you're 17, and you're like, well, I'd like to live my life like this person, but there's so many steps that I don't maybe understand, and, maybe it's been a while since they've gone through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you can find somebody that is solid, that is just a couple of years older than you, who is willing to mentor you and disciple you, that is beyond helpful. I mean, that's literally everything. You have someone who's just walked through these transitions in life that you're about to go through.
Yeah.
And that still even applies to us today, right?
Yeah.
Y'all
Absolutely.
are only a year into college.
Mm-hmm.
I'm, halfway through college. We don't know what the future holds, but we have people in our lives that do. And
To a certain extent.
Yes, to a certain extent. But, we have these people that we're able to model, our next steps after and see, well, this is what a godly young man does. And if I want to be like that, well, in general, these are the steps that I'm going to try to follow.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, like, if you are a young person, go ahead and find those who are a couple years below you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And go ahead and, like we said, like, the scattered transitions are very important. So, like, it's not just going to happen all at once.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go ahead and, like, find people who are younger than you and go ahead and try and be a leader. Maybe not, like, I'm not saying go out there and start telling them what to do and start telling them, hey, it's time for lunch. You can.
I'm saying that.
You can if it's needed, but, like, use your discretion. You don't need to be. You're still supposed to be their friends. I mean, you're still both students, but go ahead and be a leader in certain capacities, especially by your example and by your friendship and by a couple other things.
Yeah.
But, like, go ahead and be a leader in that capacity. That way, as time goes on, you'll be more and more prepared, and you'll be a better leader later on, and then you'll be able to help those people. Like Joey said, you'll be the older people helping out, like people that we are seeking. You'll be like that for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. If you haven't been able to tell already, we're going to talk about discipleship a lot on this podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else?
I don't know. It's been real.
It's been fun.
It's been real fun.
That's our cheesy quote for the week.
Is it?
We'll go with that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Back in the Gap podcast. We'll see you next time.